Hi, you have reached the podcast of Professor Haim Shore. In this episode, Diber or Diber, two modes of divine dialogue with humankind in a world of free will.
Diber or Diber, two modes of divine dialogue with humankind in a world of free will. The Ten Commandments, in their original biblical Hebrew, are Ten Devarim or Ten Dibrot, the singular of which is Diber. The Holy of Holies, where the tablets with the Ten Commandments were held, is Diber. A plague is Dever. All these share a common root in biblical Hebrew, dbr. The main use of this root in Hebrew is a verb, to speak. What? What is going on here? Who is speaking to whom? And how are these, most central precepts of Judeo-Christian civilization, linked to such a simple everyday verb? To speak. This podcast answers all these questions in detail. And then some. And the answers are astounding. We have formerly addressed, at length, Bible distinction between say and speak. This distinction is particularly of high significance when it comes to Bible description of God saying and God speaking. Find a relevant post at haimshore.blog. Let us start with a brief review when, in the original Hebrew Bible, God says, and when does God speak? The Hebrew Bible is highly consistent here. The distinction is simple. When God says, this is a monologue. No human response is expected, even though such is sometimes given. An implication of this is that when God says, this is a command. And a command from the divine is fulfilled to the letter. No space here for human free will. Conversely, when God speaks, this is the start of a dialogue. A dialogue between Jehovah and a member or members of humankind. This is a dialogue typified by recognition and acknowledgement of the availability of free will to humankind. Let us address two major episodes described in detail in the Bible. Genesis creation of the heaven and the earth Genesis 1, and divine giving of the Ten Commandments via Moses to the Israelites on their way from Egypt to the Promised Land. In the Hebrew biblical descriptions of these two episodes, when does God say, and when does God speak? Let us learn. Genesis 1 verse 3, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. In Hebrew, the 10 statements by which God had created the heaven and the earth are 10. Mamarim. Singular is mamar, of same root as in laima. Namely, to say. God keeps saying throughout Genesis creation narrative. Not ever speaking. You scan Genesis further on, and you do not find a single instance of God speaking. God is always saying, to Adam and Eve, to Cain and Hebel, and even to Noah, prior to Noah's flood. Where in the Bible does the divine stop saying, and for the first time, start speaking to humankind? The answer is amazing. The first time God speaks to humankind, indeed starting a dialogue between the Creator and the created, which never ceased since, is after the old corrupt generation of human beings had perished in a flood, Noah's flood, and new world order is finally established. Is this a sheer coincidence that this dialogue starts concurrently with divine promise regarding Noah's flood of never again? Let us read the first divine speak in the Bible, Genesis 8 verse 15. And God spoke to Noah, saying, Go out of the ark, you and your wife, and your sons and the wives of your sons with you. And then, immediately thereafter, divine assurances, Genesis 8 verse 21. I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. For the impulse of man's heart is evil from his youth. We move on to another historic event. Receiving by Moses of the Ten Commandments on Mount Sinai. The Ten Commandments are supposed to be the shield, which God provides humankind to protect against the impulse of man's heart that is evil from his youth. But are these really 10 commandments? Are there at all 10 commandments in the Bible? We are reading the introductory verse, preceding the detailed reading of the 10 commandments, Exodus 20 verses 2 to 14. And God spoke all these words. In the original Hebrew, no commandment. Just God speaking. Extremely strange. What did God speak? In Hebrew, Devarim, Exodus 20 verse 1. And God spoke kol ha-devarim ha'ele. However, Devarim is not words. This is an inaccurate translation. In biblical Hebrew, Devarim is plural of davar. What is davar, singular of Devarim? The noun of to speak. Namely, davar is simply a verbal utterance with same root as to speak, implying a dialogue between God and mankind. Alternative forms, which one may find in the Hebrew Bible, are Diber or Dibrot. In modern Hebrew, based on Jewish tradition, the 10 Commandments is the Ten Dibrot. It is an unfortunate wrong English translation that this has become the 10 Commandments. But commandments they are not. Just Devarim. All three forms found in the Bible, davar, diber, dibrot, originate in the same root, meaning to speak. Meaning, a dialogue between the heaven and the earth, between the divine and us, the created, mere mortals on the face of planet Earth. We will shortly explain why, in a world of free will, the 10 Commandments cannot possibly be so called. But let us first ask a required question. Perhaps this notation for the 10 Commandments is still a coincidence. Perhaps in other verses of Exodus, the 10 Commandments are correctly specified, namely, as commandments. In the respective post on haimshore.blog, results from a thorough search are given, which show unequivocally that the 10 Commandments are never so alluded to in Torah. They are always related to by a word derived from same root as speaking. Last example for use of same root is the Hebrew for the Holy of Holies, the most sacred space in the temple, where only the high priest was allowed in, and then only once a year, in the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. How is Holy of Holies denoted in Hebrew? Devir, mentioned 16 times in the Bible. Again, a derivative of to speak. Why this bizarre way of presenting the 10 Commandments, always and without exception, as resulting from God speaking, never God saying, which would necessarily imply God commanding? How is it that in the original Hebrew, God never commands, say, the 10 Commandments? Put differently, what is the root of this mystery, and what is lurking behind it? Why the 10 Commandments are not divine command, always divine speech? The answer. Free will. This answer needs clarification. It is twofold. However, both components are tightly linked to free will. They complement one another. First, note that the Ten Commandments, by definition, cannot be divine commandments. Calling the Ten Commandments such is contradiction in terms. In Genesis creation narrative, when God commands, this is always fulfilled to the letter. Can we say the same about the Ten Commandments? Can we say that being divine commandments, they are invariably fulfilled? When God spoke to the Israelites, "Thou shalt not murder," sixth commandment, apparently it is not a divine command. For if it were, it would be always fulfilled. Therefore, the Ten Commandments are only a divine declaration, God speaking, within God's dialogue with humankind. The second answer is also tightly linked to free will. A famous rabbi was once asked a well-known question. Can God create a rock so heavy that even God cannot lift? The rabbi shrewdly answered, yes, he already did. It is called free will. Torah, and later on also the Hebrew prophets, never tired of repeating this message, in no uncertain terms. We have free will, and we are free to choose whether to pursue the Ten Commandments and derivatives thereof. However, we need to remember that this is what God wishes of us. This is what He expects of us to do. Our first answer to the question why the Ten Commandments cannot be so named was that divine command is always fulfilled. Obviously, the Ten Commandments do not comply with this specification. The second reason, complementing the first, is free will. In Torah, existence of free will, granted by God to humankind, is left, right, and center. It is declared therein in no uncertain terms. Two examples. Example 1, Deuteronomy 30 verse 15. See, I set before you today life and that which is good, and death and that which is bad. Example 2, Deuteronomy 30 verse 19. I call heaven and earth to witness this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessing and cursing. Therefore, choose life, that both you and your seed may live. Likewise, Hebrew prophets repeatedly insist, for example, Micah 6 verse 8. He has told thee, O man, what is good, and what does Jehovah requires of you, but to do justice and love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. God has bestowed upon us free will. It is up to us to decide whether we are willing to pursue the Ten Commandments or, alternatively, to ignore them. We summarize. Divine commandments, as revealed in Genesis creation, are not subject to free will. Law of nature demands total compliance. Since God said these commandments, they represent divine monologue. No dialogue, no communication. Conversely, the Ten Commandments, they were spoken by God, they are part of a dialogue. God speaking to humankind, expressing what the divine desires of us. Now it is for us to decide. The next required question is this. Why do we have free will? If the Ten Commandments are, in the original Hebrew, Ten Dibrot, expressing God speaking, Elohim Medaber, not God saying or commanding, so that free will is maintained. Why do we need free will? What is the purpose? There is only one answer. We are here to create ourselves, to deliver ourselves a form. Each of us is given an opportunity to shape up his or her own world, and this requires free men and women, each maintaining free will. In abundance. In Hebrew, when a person has passed away, you say, halak le'alamo, literally, went to his world. This idiom derives from Kohelet, Ecclesiastes 2 verse 5. The man goes to the home of his world, and the mourners go about the streets. We, earthbound mortals, are doomed to have free will because it allows us, each, to create and shape up our own specific and special world. Via the thoughts that we think, the decisions we take, the words we utter, the deeds that we do. Brick by brick, each of us build our own world. And when we die, this is the world that we are going to dwell in. Bible's idea and truth explicitly stated. To build our own personal world, our future home, after we die, free will is essential. The 10 commandments are, therefore, not divine commandments at all. They are divine declaration that God has spoken to us within his communication with humankind, so that our own personal world, that which we keep creating while alive, be for us a deserving hospitable home once we die. How are all these connected to current pandemic, to a plague? In Hebrew, Dever derived from same root as Diber. There are two legs to divine communicating with humankind, God speaking to us, maintaining a dialogue. God speaks to us via the Ten Devarim, singular of which is Davar. But God also talked to us through Dever, identically written, somewhat differently pronounced. What is Dever? A plague that under special circumstance may turn into a pandemic. Both Davar and Dever derive from same root as to speak. Could we conceive of a more bizarre link than that between the 10 commandments and a pandemic? What is this link signaling to us? Inescapably, it signals that as the 10 commandments is divine communication, God speaking to us, so is a plague, Dever. And both put together signal to us a choice, a simple choice. Either Diber, 10 commandments, or Dever, which embodies the consequence of going astray from the Ten Dibrot. This theme is endlessly repeated by the prophets, linking Dever, plague, to Diber, the singular of the 10 commandments. The Bible refers to Dever 49 times, always as a tool in the hands of God to send punishment for ignoring his Devarim. Biblical prophets, mostly Jeremiah and Ezekiel, enumerate 3 adverse divine responses to human iniquities, violating the 10 Devarim. Sword, famine, plague. In biblical Hebrew, sword is herev, famine is ra'av, plague is dever. These are major punishments that Jehovah sends, or judges with, or strikes with, humankind gone astray. And the plague, dever, like Diber, commandment, would always remind us, reading the Bible in Hebrew, the double message of divine communication with human beings. Both Diber and Dever are divine speaking, maintaining a dialogue with us not as a collective, but as individuals. The 10 commandments are all pronounced, in the original Hebrew, as divine call to the individual. They all are articulated in the singular. A plague is no different. It is striking the individual, not the collective or the community, as in an earthquake, rash in Hebrew. And it is up to each of us, as individuals of free will, to choose Diber or Dever. Divine monologue, say. Law of nature. No free will. Requiring total compliance. Divine dialogue, speak. Randomness. Free will. And a choice, the Ten Commandments, Diber, or a plague, Dever. This is our life. This is the basic structure of the world, which we are doomed to create for ourselves while alive, and to dwell in. Thereafter. Ever after.
Thank you for listening. Until the next episode, goodbye.